forecast section. So we've now dealt with the forecast models themselves. We've had a look at where you can look at the updating hourly forecast, but what about those forecast to intervene products? So in the forecast tabs here, a lot of these products that you'll see are automated, but probably about 50% of them have forecaster intervention as well. And the most important one is the 5-day national en route forecast. Now, as I said before, this is kind of the gold standard product here. All of this is completely manually produced by our team of meteorologists. They work through the night to issue these forecasts at 3 AM daily, and it's a hazard-based forecast. So in order to make a point, I'm going to home in on a couple of routes. So let's look at the Scotland route just for an example, so we can describe here what we're looking at. Now, firstly, you get your weather text for the coming 24 hours, and the Network Rail weather operating day is 6 AM until 6 AM the following day. So it encompasses a morning, an afternoon, an evening, and night, and then finishes the following day, in line roughly with the train operating times. So the top paragraph here gives you some detail of what's likely to occur in the coming 24 hours. If there's not much happening, particularly that's not hazardous, then this text will be very short. We don't want to waste your time having to read a lot when there's not really very much going on. But likewise, if there are a lot of hazardous forecasts around, there may be problems with snow, wind and rain all in the same day, this text can be very, very detailed and very large to give you as much detail as possible. Underneath that, there's a 2 to 5 day prediction. So this is a text that's basically giving you an overview of what's likely to come between days 2 and 5. Now, underneath these is a hazard table. This is then broken up for each route into individual forecast areas. So in the case of Scotland, you've got Perth here, then Glasgow, Highland, and so on. And each line represents a forecast day from 06 to 06. So Thursday, for example, is being shown here. And then for each column, you have the particular hazard involved, whether it's wind or rain or snow, and then the confidence of that hazard actually occurring. Now, we'll come back onto confidences a little bit later, because we understand that confidences are important to Network Rail and can actually be the determinant in key decision making. But what do these hazard colours actually mean? Well, that's what I'm going to concentrate on now. So if you go into the library section here, one thing you can find in the library section are archives of every single forecast we've ever produced, as well as observation data going back anything up to about 5 or 6 years or so from all of the different weather stations. But also in there is what we call the hazard tables. Now, if I click on that, this is Network Rail's National Alert Threshold system. Now, MetDesk didn't create these. These were provided to us by Network Rail. And it's based upon looking at disruption to the train lines going back over the decades that was caused by weather, and what sort of how severe was the weather during the times of that disruption. So in other words, if you look at the top column here, the hourly gusts section, the second one down, it's been determined that wind speeds of less than 40 miles per hour, or wind gusts of less than 40 miles per hour, they're the instantaneous gusts, remember. We have winds in 2 forms in forecasting. You have the mean wind speed, which is the average wind over a 10-minute period, including all of the peaks and troughs in the wind speed. But the ones that we are most interested in really in terms of hazardous weather is those wind gusts, those powerful gusts that may only last a few seconds. They're the ones that usually do the damage. And so it's been determined that over 40 miles per hour, Network Rail should be on an aware level 1 risk. That means essentially that the routes are aware of the fact that there's going to be some gusty winds around, and will probably be keeping a closer eye on things. Now, adverse level between 50 and 59, of course, that's where things can start to become more troublesome. And then 60 mile per hour or more is the extreme level 3, or the red level. And we know that that has big implications on Network Rail, pre-preparations, perhaps amended timetables, and so on. It's worth a cursory mention at this stage that these wind gust thresholds are not changed dependent on season. So in other words, a 40 mile per hour gust in the summer is aware, and it is in the winter as well. You should be aware of the fact that, of course, the 40 mile per hour gust in the likes of July and August can be more problematic, because that includes trees that are in full leaf, so they act more like sails, and damage is more forthcoming in the summertime when you've got lower wind speeds. Now, our forecasters will go into length in the text to point that out, and in EWATS as well. But just bear in mind that wind gusts of a lesser degree in summer can actually cause more problems. Now, if we look at rainfall, the next column down here, rainfall is the one that I think a lot of this morning's, or this afternoon, depending on when you're viewing this course, is surrounded by. And there are 2 alert levels for rainfall, dependent on what we call the soil moisture index. The SMI is essentially just a measure of how wet the soils are. And we predict how wet the soils are looking at various levels in the soil, the top 7 centimetres combined with the next 30 centimetres down, all the way down to about 1 metre down under the ground. Of course, in the summertime, the soils are often quite dry. In the wintertime, they're often quite wet. But after big rainfall events, the soil can become quite saturated. And you need a lesser amount of rain on a saturated soil to cause you flood or instability problems compared with that same amount of rain on a dry soil. So as a result, on the 24-hour unsaturated total, so these are rainfall totals in a 24-hour period from 0600 to 0600, and you can see there that on dry soils or unsaturated soils, we need 40 millimeters in a 24-hour period to produce the extreme level, but you can half that for saturated or soils that have a field capacity. So essentially what we're saying is that only 20 millimeters of rain on a very wet soil can cause flooding or instability problems in the land, but you need up to 40 on the dry soils. Now this is just 24-hour rainfall totals. Once upon a time, when we were forecasting for Network Rail, that was the only rain hazard threshold that we had. But of course, you could get, say, 15 millimeters of rain or so falling in the space of an hour. That would barely show up. So in the summertime, for example, on dry soils, you need 20 millimeters to give you that first level 1 aware system or threshold. If you had 15 millimeters, so 1.5, then that wouldn't even flag up unaware. However, if all of that rain fell in just 1 hour, that could cause you huge amounts of flooding problems. So we created here the convective rainfall intensity, which runs from the 1st of May through to the 30th of September. And that is to capture the spring, summer and early autumn conditions that are right for powerful downpours and thunderstorms to develop. You don't really get those so much in the winter time. So it's really a hazard that's most applicable during the summer months. And you can see there that if we have 10 millimeters of rain falling in the space of an hour, you get an aware. Over 20 is likely to get an extreme forecast. And many of the flooding issues and landslide issues in the summer of 2020 actually occurred where you were receiving 20 millimeters or so of rain in the space of an hour. So there's lots more things here on the alert threshold system. You'd have to have a good look at this to understand what those thresholds are, but it's very important to mention that the flip over, if you like, from one threshold to another is an infinitely small change in the weather. Now, it's understandable, of course, that if you go from an adverse for rainfall to an extreme, that might seem like a huge shift in the weather forecast. The weather forecast has changed dramatically. It hasn't necessarily. We may have been forecasting 38 millimeters of rain and now we're forecasting 41. It's a tiny difference, but it can leap you into another threshold. Now, forecasters are very aware of this issue of changing thresholds, and we don't move thresholds lightly. So we have to be very confident here at Metdesc that you're going to be seeing rainfall or wind alerts going into a new threshold before we will move that threshold across. If in doubt, of course, you can speak to us on the phone and we will give away or give across that level of detail in the EWATS as well. So that's the National Alert System, and now I'm going to go back to looking at the 5-day forecast. Okay, so we're now back in the 5-day forecast. I've just defaulted to the Wales route here so we can have a look at some of the hazards that are being predicted. So as we've already mentioned, the hazard thresholds are listed in the library and hazard table section. So if you're not quite sure exactly what these adverse or extreme thresholds relate to, you can have that page up to have a look. So as you can see here on for North Wales on Thursday, we've got aware forecast for wind with high confidence. So what we're saying there is that we're confident that the wind gust will exceed 40 miles per hour, but won't exceed 50 miles per hour during the course of that day. And there will be detail in here. For example, you can see wind detail. It's giving you the rough timings of when those winds are likely to occur and also where they're likely to occur as well. But you'll see that we've also got an aware level for heavy rainfall. Now, we're working on wet soils at the moment in the case of this forecast. So you only need 10 millimeters of rain to actually get an aware level hazard, but we've got low confidence. So what we're basically suggesting there is that in this situation, there will be rain around, it's likely to be rain, but we're not that confident that it will just sneak over that 10 millimeter mark. It may remain just below. If I move down here to South Wales and we'll look at Saturday, you can see that we've now got an adverse forecast for wind. On Saturday, our confidence is medium. On Sunday, our confidence is low. So in these situations, it's a case of saying, well, there's more confidence really of wind speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour on the Saturday, but a lower confidence of doing so on the Sunday. And usually the text will indicate if winds could be stronger or could be lighter than what is actually being predicted. We've also got an extreme forecast for heavy rain there. Now, again, when you've got wet soils, the difference between an adverse and an extreme for rain is very, very small. So for Mid Wales, we're suggesting an adverse, that's 15 millimeters of rain. And then for South Wales, we've got an extreme, which is 20. So only half a centimetre difference in the amount of rain over a 24-hour period is what's yielding the two different hazard thresholds. And you can see we've got medium confidence for 15 millimetres of rain and low confidence for 20. So that's showing you we've got more confidence of the rainfall exceeding 15 than we have for exceeding 20. But as I mentioned before, holding EWOTs is what Network Rail like to do. We love to get involved in those, and we can give across our kind of confidence levels and explain why our confidence levels may not be high. And underneath the main hazard table, you do have 6 hourly maximum wind gust charts. They will just tally up with the forecast that you're seeing above. So that concludes the main hazard forecast, and of course this gives you a 5-day heads up of what's coming. You can also look in the forecast system at the 10-day national. Now this is just a brief text overview, but it does cover the period from 6 to 10 days as well. Of course, at that sort of range, we're not going to go into huge amounts of detail. There's an acceptance that weather, of course, is difficult to predict. It is a prediction of the future ultimately, and up to 10 days in advance, the forecast is more likely to change. But we will give you trends, and we've said here, changeable at first with spells of rain, although becoming drier later as high pressure builds. So we're not really going into too much detail about how strong the winds are going to be or how heavy the rain. We're just giving you a flavour of what's likely to come.